Despite what people online say, the best shooters in the world have a lot of similarities, so ignoring them isn't really going to do you any good. So in this video, we're going to go over what actually matters with your shooting form and what doesn't matter. First up, I'd like to talk about what actually doesn't matter. So we're going to go over a few myths here. So the first myth is having a gap or shooting with your fingertips. From everything I've seen, there are plenty of good shooters that shoot with a gap, and there's plenty of good shooters that shoot with the ball resting on their palm. I really do not think it matters much unless there is an issue. Forcing yourself to shoot with either your palm or your fingertips is probably going to do you more harm than just kind of keeping what you already have and working on the other mechanical issues. Some good examples of shooters that do shoot with their fingertips off the top of my head are going to be Steve Kerr, Tyler Hero. And then you're going to have shooters that shoot with the ball a little bit more deep into their palm, like Damian Lillard and Stephen Curry. So really, there's good examples of both. It doesn't seem like one is better than the other. It just seems almost like preference. In theory, it seems to me that if you are a guy who shoots with the ball in your palm, you could probably shoot a little bit further because you have a bigger base. But if you're a guy who kind of hugs up the line like Steve Kerr or Colin Kaneppel, then shooting with your fingertips is no problem. Right? That's why Damian Lillard and Stephen Curry might be shooting with the ball in their palms a little bit more, in theory. But as you can see, there's good examples of shooters who shoot with their fingertips and good examples of shooters who shoot with their palm. Next up, we're going to talk about a 90-degree elbow angle. So when people refer to this, they're talking about at the set point, if there is a 90-degree angle created by the forearm and upper arm. And we simply just don't see this. Sometimes with bigger players, this is the case because they have longer limbs, or sometimes when players are in the mid-range because they don't have to bend back their forearm as much. But when you really look at the best shooters in the world, a lot of times they're getting way below 90 because that ball has to be relatively close to their face because you have a lot more elbow extension to go. Like if we're here, this is much lower than 90 degrees, and I have a lot more power here than I do here. So if I just held the ball like this, I don't have as much extension to go. So I'm not going to be able to create as much power. This is something we just don't see. I mean, there's a bunch of examples of players that shoot at a high percentage with their elbow way lower than 90 degrees. Next up on things that don't matter is where you look after the ball is released. So there was a debate a while ago about whether or not you should be looking at the ball while it's in flight or if you just keep your eyes fixed on the rim. Doesn't matter. There's good examples of both. Stephen Curry, he gets his eyes on the ball. Clay gets his eyes on the ball. But then there's guys like Devin Booker who keep their eyes fixed on the rim. And there's so many examples of guys who do eyes fixed on the rim and guys who do eyes fixed on the ball while it's in flight. So it really does not matter. Me personally, I like to see the ball spin because it gives me a little bit more immediate feedback as to whether or not it's going left or going right or that kind of thing. So that's why I would prefer it that way, but that's a personal preference. Right? And I think that's probably why some of the players that I mentioned also prefer to look at the ball. But it's also like these players didn't think about, hey, I should be looking at the ball. They just naturally did it. And then when you look at them shooting, then you can see. It's not like they tried to put that into their form. You know what I mean? So this is something you really don't need to worry about because there's good examples of great shooters who shoot with their eyes fixed on the rim and players who shoot with their eyes on the ball after it's left their hands. Last thing we're going to talk about here that I think is a little bit of a myth is your guide hand being on the side of the ball. It should be on the side of the ball, but it actually should be creeping up a little bit more towards the top. A lot of times when you're taught to shoot at a younger age, your hands are way too close together. And that's okay at that age because you end up pushing with both hands. But as you get older, if your hands are really, really close, you'll end up pushing with two hands and then you'll have a lot of direction issues. When you're younger, because you need more power, it's kind of a natural thing that you're going to push with two hands. But as you get older, you're going to want your shooting hand to be doing the work, obviously. So we want that hand to be creeped up a little bit towards the top so it's kind of out of the way. When your hands are too close and your hand is almost ending up behind the ball, that's where you're naturally going to want to push, and that's going to cause a lot of direction issues, a lot of backspin issues, and so that's where we're going to really want to avoid it. Now we're going to actually talk about what does matter when it comes to form. Now before I get into this, just know an exception does not make the rule. I can find a lot of great shooters that are exceptions to these rules that we're going to go over here, and you can use them, but just know they don't make the rule. If the majority of good shooters do one thing, and I talk about that one thing, one shooter that doesn't do that thing doesn't negate all of those shooters that do. So first we're going to talk about thumb flicks. Thumb flicks, hate to break it to you, they do matter, especially if your rotation is off. Now there's good shooters that have thumb flicks. Ray Allen had a thumb flick. Larry Bird, Reggie Miller, Kyrie Irving, LaMelo Ball. These guys have thumb flicks. The only thing is their rotation is straight. So if you're a guy who shoots with a thumb flick and your rotation is nice and straight, maybe for you, you can keep it. But the overwhelming majority of players that push with a little bit of their guide hand have rotation issues. Anytime you have rotation issues, that means you're doing one of two things, right? Either you're not pushing through the middle of your shooting hand, so you're kind of snapping across it, or you're pushing with your guide hand. And what that's going to cause is direction issues. So you're going to be missing left and right. And that's something we always want to avoid. If we can just miss front rim, back rim, short or long, then we're going to be able to control for a lot more. If you have to control for direction and power, you're going to really have a lot of more issues. And again, most great shooters don't have the thumb flick. Curry, no thumb flick, despite what you might think. He pushes a little bit with the guide hand, but it doesn't flick out like this, and it definitely doesn't affect his rotation. JJ Redick, no thumb flick. KD, no thumb flick. Klay Thompson, no thumb flick. I can keep going. The best shooters in the world generally don't have too much pressure coming in from that guide hand. I have a bit of a personal story with the thumb flick because I shot really well with the thumb flick, and then when I got rid of it, I shot even higher percentage. But I'll leave you with this. I have a lot of people I talk to that shoot with the thumb flick, and they say like, oh, well, LaMelo Ball does it, so it's okay. But it's like, you're not LaMelo Ball. You don't have great rotation. You're not a great shooter. So like thinking that you're going to essentially get a bunch of reps to the point where you're LaMelo Ball is silly because you're not going to do that, right? Again, the exception does not make the rule. In general, from what I've seen from the years, fixing that makes players skyrocket their percentages a lot faster than simply just getting up reps and reps and reps and reps and reps, right? Because the more variables you have to control, like your right hand and your left hand, the more inconsistency you're going to have. You're now having to control for multiple things as opposed to just making it simple and only having to control for one. So it becomes much more of a repeatable form. The next thing we're talking about is set point. Your set point absolutely matters. This one is so universal. We're not really going to find a lot of good shooters with the set point down here. So when you're a kid, sure, you can shoot like this. As you get older, we need to be able to get here where we're underneath the ball. I can already hear people saying, oh, Shawn Marion. Shawn Marion wasn't that great of a shooter. I don't know where we're getting the idea that he was a great shooter. You can look at his numbers. He was maybe a better shooter than you might expect with someone with that form. But again, exception doesn't make the rule. If we're looking at all the best shooters, there's two things we're going to see with their set point. For one, they're underneath the ball. What I mean by underneath the ball is their shooting hand is high enough relative to their body that if we were to take away their guide hand, the ball would sort of just rest. If you were to kind of hold it like this, the ball would fall out because your hand's behind the ball. This allows you to push the ball up and out in the most efficient manner. If you're behind the ball, you're going to have to do some pretty silly things to get the ball to go up, right? The other thing that we'll see with the set point is that it's relatively close to their face, right? So like we don't want to be all the way out here because again, we can't get under the ball. Even if I really bend my wrist back, it's quite uncomfortable. All right, so this is going back to talking about what angle we should have with our set point. 90 degrees is going to be hard for me to generate power. A lot of times we're going to get a lot closer to the face so that we can get more power going towards the rim, right? Because you can extend more. All right, so those are two things we're going to see with every shooter essentially, where they're under the ball, they're close to the face so they can extend towards the rim in the most efficient manner. So if you have a low set point, at a certain point, you're going to want to get under it. The next part of your form that does matter is what part of your shooting hand is actually going through the ball. You can also think about it like what finger leaves the ball last. All right, so we want the pressure coming in from your index and your middle finger. What I see with players when they have the pressure coming in from the outside part of their hand, their pinky side, is they kind of snap across the ball like this. Sometimes you'll see them literally go like this, where the wrist kind of faces the wrong way. Other times we'll see it like the elbow and the shoulder will kind of like move across their frame. And again, this causes rotation issues. I mentioned there's two things that cause rotation issues. One is like a guide hand thumb flick. The other is this. If you push with the wrong part of your shooting hand, and you don't push through the middle with the index and middle, you will have rotation issues a lot of the times, right? And a lot of times you'll be missing to the side that you're pushing. So if I'm right-handed players will push across left, left-handed players will push across right. So if you're right-handed and you're someone who pushes across with the outside part of your hand going through the ball, you'll miss left a lot. And vice versa, if you're left-handed, you'll miss right a lot. What we'll see with these players is as the ball's leaving their hands, these fingers go down first. We want these fingers to go down first, right? The index and the middle are the drivers. And there's so many examples of this. All the best shooters with the best release, with the best touch, are releasing off that index and middle, and it's going through the ball first. So anytime you see that pinky and ring going through the ball first, that means the outside part of our hand is doing the work. So we're gonna have to work on that release a little bit more. Last thing we're gonna talk about here is shot lines. All right, so generally speaking, we don't want to move across the outside here. So there are some shooters, again, that do this. Again, the exception doesn't make the rule. All right, so the most infamous example is Lonzo Ball. So he literally would shoot like from here. We also have shooters that pull the ball from their left to their right, or vice versa if they're left-handed. And we want that shot line again to be as simple as possible. Anytime we're adding unnecessary variables, that's where we're going to be running into some problems, because we're just having to control for more. There's more room for error, right? If we can make this path from our waist to our face, or to our set point, as smooth and as simple as possible, as short as possible, that's where we're going to have a lot of consistency. That's where we're going to have a lot of repeatability. So simplicity is what we're after here. So if we're going across this way, you're adding a lot of room for error because of that extra motion. And this is what we're going to see with a lot of the best shooters. Now, Kevin Durant is someone people will bring up as someone who kind of brings it up his left side and then he gets towards the middle. But again, exception doesn't make the rule. Think about any other good shooter. It's really hard to find examples of players with bad shot lines, players who don't move the ball just straight up the middle of their body. Really not going to find too many options. Now, going back to Lonzo Ball, he was a fantastic shooter in high school and college. When he got to the NBA, his numbers dipped and people would just kind of let him shoot. What did he do to become a better shooter? He fixed his form. And so that is the quickest way to become a better shooter. Sure, he could have just repped it out, but his ceiling as a shooter probably would have been here. Now his ceiling as a shooter has rose. And so that's why form actually matters, because once again, just like I started this video, the best shooters in the world, they share more similarities than they do differences. Sure, they have differences. Everyone has something unique. We all have different bodies, all right? We all have different levels of comfort, but they share more similarities than they do differences. So we have to pay attention to those similarities and try to replicate them in our own forms.